Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of the Start Small, Think Big podcast, brought to you by Digital Meld. My name is Brad Grew, and I'm founder and CEO of Digital Meld.
And I'm Robert Grew, founder and CTO at Digital Meld.
And I'm Carrie Hunley, Chief Growth Officer at Digital Meld.
Yeah, today's topic is one that's going to touch pretty much everybody. The human side of AI, change management, and AI-driven culture shifts. I think when people think about automation and AI, they immediately think about the worst-case scenarios that the robots are coming to take our jobs. And that's going to be true in some cases, but I think in most cases, the AI is going to help improve your lives and make you more efficient and free up your time to do the stuff you really care about. And so today we're going to talk about all kinds of things from like the culture shift of that, including changing the overall culture and thought process across the entire organization and maybe even the entire world and the economy as a whole. And then just like within your own internal teams and how you're going to work within your teams. And we have some great insights from really, really large corporations. We're going to try to focus on large corporation enterprise, but also scale that down for the mid-markets and medium-sized and small businesses as well. This is a problem we talked about in the past, but we think small businesses probably have a leg up with AI because it's just taking your time-constrained headcount and then basically making you more efficient and allowing you to punch above your weight to the higher pay grades and the bigger companies. And so Microsoft a couple weeks ago released their 2025 Work Index annual report. And what this is basically a combination of 31,000 surveys that they sent out to skilled workers all across the world, companies of all shapes and sizes, to understand where they think AI is going to affect them. They've created a new term called the frontier firm. And the frontier firm is basically, it's going to be you and your team working with AI and more importantly, AI agents. And so that's Microsoft, I think, is trying to lead the forefront with this culture shift and change how we, think about this. And like now it's just not your team, but it's your team with agents. We're in the early stages of that. Robert can probably touch base on that in a few minutes, but agents can do some cool things now, but the really, really cool stuff is coming in the future, in the near future. But starting that thought process now is really helpful.
Yeah, I think the big thing with the agent side of it is there's a ton of use cases right now, but most of them are typically strictly automations, which we've talked about this before in the past. I think if you do, and I would suggest everybody, we'll have links for this, I'm sure, in the show notes to read this. Just kind of keep that caveat in your mind. You're going to hear the term AI agents used commonly, I think, throughout all these reports. Have an open mind. It might not be strictly an agent, but that doesn't matter. It's still providing value. So definitely don't get caught up in those weeds, because I do sometimes. I'm just like, hey, this isn't an agent. This is just some automation or something, or just an LLM or whatever. So I would keep that in mind when you're reading this. You're going to get a ton of value out of it. It's a different perspective. We talk about it all the time. If you listen to other AI podcasts, they're talking about this all the time. This is from Microsoft, who I'm sure they spent tons of money on this report. And when I first clicked it, I'm like, what is this, a survey from their local staff or something? No, these are, other companies, right? It's not Microsoft employees. I'm sure there's some, in the report, right? But there's also other larger companies. And even in the report, it touches on the small business side of it as well. So definitely check this out, because I thought it was a lot of value, at least for me.
Yeah, and what's interesting, I'm obviously spend a lot of time on LinkedIn trying to put out useful content, but also to consume useful content. And I love a good infographic, right? Or some new, here's where things are going, especially in the realm of technology and work and trends, all the things that the report is about. But, as a person who has not always been in IT and doesn't have as much of a technical background, I can kind of empathize with both sides, right? Back before I knew anything about technology, I would have seen, an infographic on LinkedIn, which I see these regularly nowadays, like, oh, the realm of, you're going to have an AI boss and they're going to have this entire org chart of all the AI employees underneath them. We're not going from today to that immediately, right? There's going to be a lot of steps that happen before that. And I think it's going to be a meaningful progression. So you're going to go from, okay, here's my workflow. Here's a process diagram. Here's how this department does A to Z, this task. But maybe automation starts coming in there. Maybe you have an internal agent that only does one part of that process, right? So they're kind of worked into the workflow that still changes the way that you map out your processes and the work handoff between one section of the task to another. And then maybe eventually it's that of your entire team, you've got one quote unquote agent that's now a part of it. It's not going to just go from where we are today to now you've got a whole team of AI agents, right? So I think that I just want to make sure that we pull things back down to reality for the folks who don't understand this. And you see it on LinkedIn from someone who their headline and their profile says AI expert. So surely they know what they're talking about. And this infographic is coming next week. That's where we're going. And it's bombastic in a way, like there's some truth to it. But to me, when I see posts like that on LinkedIn, it's almost like the equivalent of YouTube clickbait, right? Because it's so bombastic that you want to immediately take that in and freak out. But I think that there's a more logical progression, and it's more important to understand why you should start exploring these things and going in the direction because of the benefits that you can get versus just hearing the headline and spinning out of control, as we often talk to folks who have.
Yeah, and I think we could talk about the why you should listen to this podcast and why you should take what we're saying within this podcast seriously. And it's mainly because, again, this isn't coming from us. This is coming from Microsoft's 2025 Work Trend Index. I believe this is the first year they've done it, but they've done a survey of 31,000 knowledge workers. I touched on that across 31 countries. That's the really important thing. And again, this is going to be companies of all shapes and sizes. And the big thing here is they have the Microsoft 365 telemetry. So if you're a Microsoft 365 customer, Microsoft is capturing metrics on the back end of how people are utilizing these tool sets. They're capturing how people are using Copilot within Teams and how people are using Copilot and all these other in Word, Excel, PowerPoint, their Outlook. They're capturing all of those metrics, and that's going to give them the data and insights. We've talked about how unlocking the power of your data helps your business grow. This is them unlocking the power of their data, helping their business grow. They're trying to tag this new term called the frontier firm, where it's a new organizational model where human workers collaborate with AI agents. That's the crux of it. It's nothing really special. There are 3 phases of the AI integration. There's human with assistant. So the AI helps a single employee do a current task. There's human agent teams where AI agents act as like the digital colleagues, as kind of Carrie was saying. You have that like hierarchy. You have that like business map of everybody within the organization, and you have those digital colleagues. We're not there yet. We're still in the human with assistant. We're all using ChatGPT or Microsoft Copilot. And then there's human-led agent operated. So where you have a human manager who's an AI manager who's managing agents that are doing things digitally. Again, that's probably several years down the road for most people, but the decisions you make now can help get you there quickly. And so basically the Work Trend Index lets us know that upskilling isn't optional anymore. I think in every one of our episodes, we've talked about how we need to upskill. We need to increase and that's why we started the podcast, to help you learn how to utilize these tools. And so that's not optional anymore. Moving forward, I think we're going to have to work together cross-functionally within teams to help skill up everyone across the org and better understand how to use these tool sets. But again, the business knowledge is the most important thing. The AI is just a tool set. And the big thing is opening up those lines of communications within your teams to understand the power of these tools with your data and your business processes.
And just accepting that, IT is not a bubble anymore. It touches the entire organization. It's going to increasingly year after year, or honestly in tech years, like month after month, because it's moving so rapidly. It's the same to now. You can hardly live a normal human life without a smartphone, right? You go to a restaurant, the menu's only available with the QR code. You go somewhere and you need to check in, they send you a text message to your phone. It's the same kind of thing where we just have to accept that this can and will improve things, or it can hinder you, but it's no longer separate from the rest of the organization, the rest of the workflows, how you should be strategizing or budgeting. It's all convoluted now. And I know that can be stressful for some folks, but ignoring it is the ostrich in the sand approach is definitely not going to get you anywhere.
Yeah, if you look at the report that Brad's going to link to, there's a small business section. I think it's at a link towards the bottom. One of the lines out of this section that really got to me was 24% of small businesses are using agents today, which I was a little surprised by that, to be honest. But I think that goes back to my original comment. The term agents is kind of interchangeable, I feel. But anyway, and an impressive 79% are planning to implement them in the next 12 to 18 months. So what does that mean for any small business owner or any leader in a small business? You need to be thinking about this stuff because it sounds like everybody else is doing it. And don't just take it for what I'm saying. This is exactly what the report is showing. And so I thought that was very interesting. We could probably see that because we get people all the time that talk to us daily about, AI tool sets, business process, automation. And so it's good to know that it's not just, we all think about this all the time. And it's good to know that, hey, this is also coming from somebody else and also coming with a lot of backing, right? Like Microsoft's no joke. They have I would argue the most business data probably out of any other industry or any other company in the industry. I mean, maybe Google's a close second, but I kind of take their data and what it says as the truth, in my opinion. So I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, and again, as Robert said, this is part of their index that they've shared, and they've probably spent millions, if not tens of millions of dollars developing this, 31,000 surveys and across the industries. And they do have case studies as well. They have a case study for Wells Fargo, Dow, Bayer, and an ICG, which is a startup. So they actually have case studies of how they're utilized within this business. I will try to give you some use cases because we're going through this process right now. We've set up some internal stuff to like, hey, how can we automate things faster than we normally would with like using Power Automate and just doing business processes? This podcast is a perfect example, right? When I'm like developing what we're going to talk about in this podcast, I go to ChatGPT or Microsoft Copilot, and I have like a roadmap of what I kind of want to talk about. And then I kind of hone in on the key talking points. Then I go do my own research on YouTube and all these other sorts of things. But in the future, you're actually going to have agents that are able to do all of that legwork for me. I just by giving it a prompt, and then you have specialized agents that go do those things. So they have Microsoft, for an example, as in their Microsoft Copilot. Again, Microsoft Copilot's not the only platform that's doing this. Agents are being introduced across pretty much every major platform for B2B AI usage. But Microsoft has Copilot built on Microsoft 365, so that's where we know. And this is their report, so we're focusing on that. But they recently released a researcher agent where it assists in gathering and synthesizing information based upon what you prompt it across several services, right? And so that research that I do for the podcast, it can help expedite that process. Again, I'm always going to put eyes on and make sure I know what I'm talking about, but it does a lot of the legwork. And then there's the analyst agent, which processes and interprets the data. We keep saying, and we tell our clients and our potential clients that like dashboards are going the way of the dodo. You're just going to query a large language model about your data and say, hey, can you give me the results for the last 45 days or 42 days? You can be very specific, where a dashboard's very static on like the overall look and design, where you can prompt an agent to give you that information specific to how you want it right then. And there's like a project management agent. They just released that one. So it'll help with project management from that perspective. Interpreter agent, which facilitates real-time interpretation. We're in Texas, so it's very much a bilingual state, and who knows if you can use real-time interpretation. And we work in construction engineering. A lot of construction guys are Spanish speaking only. It'd be great for me to go out. I failed Spanish 3 times, I think. I lived in Texas my whole life. I can order tacos and beer. That's about all I can do. My brain just doesn't work in that way. So if I can't wait till I have that, universal translator from Star Trek, which we already have, but like to do that with also, if I have someone go on our contact form and submit something in Spanish, it'll auto translate for me and it'll give it to me in English, and I can goes the other way too. So whenever I contact them, I'm writing in English and it auto translates to Spanish for them. So those are just some of the ways to kind of wrap your head around those things. But you will be agent bosses in the future, but that's still some time to go. But Microsoft's trying to you can't move the corporate ship overnight, right? So that's why they've come out with this frontier. It's a new frontier, and they're trying to steer that ship slowly.
Yeah, and we always link really great resources in all of the show notes, but would highly encourage y'all to take a look at this report. And I've been guilty in the past of saying, okay, well, they're referencing these huge companies. That's great because they have huge, pockets that they can accomplish all these things. Well, one of the main points that we try to drive home in this podcast is that we finally reached the point where technology really is the great equalizer. These things are available and accessible to you at any size, maybe not as quickly and as large of a many use cases all at once, but you get a quick win and you're able to use the freed up resources, time, money, what have you, to explore the next use case. And it's absolutely tangible now versus in the past. I would have probably dismissed some of this just because I couldn't envision myself or my organization. But now those barriers are coming down. So it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, and it's on business leaders to help upskill, right? And there are tools, again, if you're Microsoft 365 Viva, it's very easy to like turn on the Copilot training program within that. If you have questions on how to do that, reach out to us. We can help you do that. That's very easy to do. And it's one of those things that you're using the AI tool sets to help train your workforce. And again, to help develop that curriculum. That's exactly what I would do. If I'm developing a training curriculum specific to your business processes, I'm using AI to help get me that framework, and then I put in the meat and potatoes. But for the most part, you should be using these tools to upskill. And it's going to fall on business leaders to help do that. It's also going to fall on the individual to take the time whenever you can. I know everybody has busy lives, but to help, not get left behind. Just like businesses are using AI to help differentiate themselves from their competitors, the workforce is going to be doing the same thing. If you're in a highly skilled position, that's probably not a big deal. But if you're in a lower skilled position, then that's going to differentiate you. If you know how to use the basics of AI and the basics things, and there are, like, if you go to Hugging Face, again, I'll put this in the show notes, but Hugging Face is a free open source, and they have an agentic course you can do for free. There's just a lot of different places you can go and learn more about the basics of agents for free. I'll put a bunch of those. Because there's just too many to even talk about those types of free trainings where you can go and just get the basics of agentic AI and the basics of AI in general in an hour or two online. So there's really no excuse other than just you may just not have the time. That is a good excuse if you don't have the time.
Deeplearning.ai. I think that's Andrew. I can never
Ng.
pronounce it.
Yeah,
NG.
Andrew.
I said NG. Somebody corrected me and said I was wrong, so I'm just going to call him Andrew.
It's
I think everybody knows when I say Andrew and AI, they all know who I'm talking about. Typically,
he's the grandfather of modern AI, in my opinion.
But that's it's free, and there's, like Brad said, there's tons of resources. Again, I know it is somewhat technical, but there's also a lot of free stuff where it relates to the actual business user. So that's huge. The other thing Brad touched on, the leaders, I keep seeing this, and I think it's even in this report. There's just this huge gap between like where leaders think companies are and where the actual employees think companies are. I find that really interesting. And I think you could probably say that in a lot of different things, but just an interesting note. It just gets me thinking, leaders, it sounds like they think they're further along than they actually are. And the employee side, they're a lot of them are still skeptical because of hey, is this going to take my job? What does this look like? That type of stuff. So, and then I think we're going to touch on that a bit further. So I'll stop there, but just really interesting.
Yeah, I also want to briefly mention that, and again, this will be in the show notes, which you can get through the LinkedIn newsletter. It's part of this. Anthropic, timely fashion, released a video yesterday called The Societal Impacts of AI. And it's about a 10 or 15-minute video. And it's kind of marketing speak, but for the most part, they talk about all these sorts of things about what we can expect of the societal impact on this. And it's not just, the ethics side of AI is part of that discussion too, right? Is AI going to, this is using the military case. Palmer Luckey gave a great TED talk this past week as well, which I'll link in the show notes. But, the discussion came up of like, when are robots going to be able to make that kill decision? And he made a good point. He goes, look, we've been making those autonomous decisions for many years, like spike pits. Think back to like medieval times. Spike pits were always a thing, right? Like they would dig a hole, put some spikes in it, and then someone could randomly walk on it. And maybe it wasn't the right person. Maybe it was a kid or something. But we've been having these discussions for many years. Like this is not the first time that we've had this discussion, but it's important to understand the ramifications of the decisions that these autonomous agents are going to be making. And so we do know that that's a nuanced topic, and it's not something we're going to solve in an hour podcast. But it's something that we should just start that conversation. I know myself and Arnold Castro, who is the assistant dean of AI at Mays Business School at Texas A&M, we were just on a call with the University of St. Thomas, which is it's a private school based in here in Houston. We're going to an event on Friday, this coming Friday, within a couple of days, where they talk about the societal impact of it. They're a Catholic institution, so a lot of what their AI discovery and things are about that impact. What's this look like? We teach people how to be good humans first, and then the software, the design, is going to naturally be a better software for humans as a whole. And so I can't wait to go to that and get some insights from that and share with you. But this is happening all across academia, especially that the societal impacts of AI are going to reach far beyond just what your workday looks like. I think it's kind of like jump into our main discussion. Are we culturally ready for AI? That really just depends on your business. Again, that's one that the leaders are going to have, and the thought leaders within your organization, and just the key stakeholders are going to have that. Are you ready for AI? In our previous episodes, we've talked about what the foundations of good AI is, and that's data. Again, we had Arnold Castro on. He talked about that too. It's data. Data is the key to everything. So if your data is not where it needs to be, then you could probably say, no, we're not culturally ready for AI because we're not technically ready for AI. And so you have to change that cultural shift internally to say, how do we get to our processes in place? How do we get our data where it needs to be? That's a culture shift too. Like it's a process shift as well, but you have to like change your mentality. It's like everything we need to do is data first. And if that's where I would start, Robert or Carrie, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think, data for sure. And then if you take the personality side of it, and just, you have all these, half of business, it's the people side of the culture, right? We hear this all the time. I think about this all the time. If I could have a device that I could wear on my body all day long, that's recording video and audio all day, every day, what would that do for me? I could find a lot of value in that, right? And I could see Carrie kind of like, oh, that's crazy. I saw that.
It's
face
literally a
you
Black Mirror episode.
It's literally a Black Mirror episode. There's like so much value I could get. Like, oh man, what did I say to this person? Or
I have
what did
mixed emotions. I think
like?
it could be amazing, but also it's just, it's a shift, right?
But that's the thing, and it's like, and I see, and it's like, I don't want to. I'm not going to do that. Like, I'm not going to do that anytime soon. But it's just
a tangible
there is a
pivot to
lot
that.
of value.
Yeah, sorry
So
to interrupt, but a tangible pivot to that is recording every meeting, right? Like that's the tangible pivot. Like we've gotten to the point in our organization where we ask people who are that aren't part of the organization if it's okay if we record first, but like we record every meeting. And why do we do that? Because of the insights we can glean from that, especially if it's like client facing. Especially if it's client facing. And not only that, we use Copilot, which gives us the summary really quickly. And that's amazing. But like we can just chat with Copilot and say, and who knows, sales process is 2 to 6 months at least. Like you're going to forget some stuff. You're just not going to know. And instead of going in line by line within notes, like what can I do? You're just asking a chatbot. And so again, I agree. Like there would be, and like there's the Windows feature recall, like from Windows 11, right? Where it records literally your whole screen and you can go back at any time and query that. Whenever it first came out, there was a big security hubbub about it, but there's from a work perspective, I don't really care like what my, if everything I'm doing is recording. From a privacy perspective, when you're private life, yeah, that's another discussion. But again, it's that culture shift. That's a overall culture shift. But the privacy, is a big one.
Yeah, I think it's always that interplay between the facts and then the people side, right? I don't think there's any area of life that you escape that very much, except perhaps if you're an AI agent truly and you're only existing on facts because that's your only inputs and you're not subject to the irrationality of human beings, right? And the nature of an actual mind. So like I have an economics background and behavioral economics, the crux of that is that people don't make rational decisions, definitely not all the time and sometimes not even frequently, right? So how as a leader or an individual or an organization do you have to constantly go back and forth between here are the facts, but then here's the people element and trying to bridge that gap and dispel myths and share knowledge as much as is possible, because if you're only looking at one side of things, you're never going to move the needle forward. You're never going to have the full picture. But humans, we have cognitive biases, and especially when it's the unknown. I mean, one of our greatest fears as humans is the unknown, right? Because we can't start to form context or make assumptions or categorize, right? Like categorization and stereotyping and all that's really, really great for when you're taking all of the information available in the world and starting to pare that down. But then you need to assess on an individual basis, right? That's basically the same thing with AI. Okay, take all the information available, take how it works in general, but now look at it through the lens of your organization and your culture and bridge those gaps. And it sounds like a large undertaking, but I think that either A, if your company culture already supports some of that in general, maybe not as it applies to technology, but maybe in other realms, we'll parlay those best practices now to incorporate technology. Or if your organization who maybe says, oh, we don't really do any of that great today, well, you should be looking at doing that better anyway. And so just loop in technology to those efforts and you'll see, I think, a tremendous impact across the board.
I think this cultural readiness really mostly comes around, most AI projects fail because of cultural resistance, not because of the technology. And that's generally probably the fault of whoever was implementing it or whoever was spearheading the implementation of it, because you didn't involve the stakeholders early enough. I think we talked about it a couple of podcast episodes ago, but as technologists and as people trying to deliver solutions, that we need to connect to the people closest to the problem. And that's not going to be the people implementing the solution. That's going to be the people who are going to utilize the solution every single day. And so if you're getting cultural resistance to this change, it's probably because you're doing a terrible job of communicating the plans and the goals with the actual people living with the day-to-day problem. And we can't help you with like how to discuss internally. You have to know how to discuss internally and communicate and make them feel important and make them feel part of the process. The only failed technology rollouts are not the only ones, but most failed technology rollouts are because you don't take the time to get to understand the problems you're even trying to solve. And does that problem even exist?
Yeah, that in perspective, right? And put yourself in other people's shoes. Like the meeting recordings, I think we've talked about meeting recordings in the past, but how I would approach that culture shift, because I'm thinking even just at my last role, like there would be heavy pushback. Any blue collar type of industry, there's going to be pushback and it's not wrong thinking. I don't, do you want your boss to hear everything that is being said in every single meeting? I definitely don't. But as an IT and technology person, I know how the systems work on the back end. It's not that simple. They can't just go and log in and see and hear every meeting, right? It doesn't work that way. But helping explain that to the user, showing the user that, and then on top of it, showing the value of, hey, here's like the main reason why we're doing this, because look what you get at the end. You get a full meeting summary in that example. It's perspective. Perspective is huge. That's something I deal with all the time. You can kind of get stuck in your ways. And so for people out there that are leaders, that can make decisions, that can make moves in your business, like, open up the eyes and put yourself in their shoes. If they're pushing back on something that you think is a good idea, ask them why. Like, what's the big problem? What are you worried about? And then try to tackle that one by one. And if you can't, then hey, maybe they were right. Maybe this isn't, the best thing to do right now. So that's how I would approach it, I think.
Absolutely. And to your point, if it was me, I mean, something I really highly suggest, and we've seen some of our clients do this, and it's been really successful. As a leader, I would purposefully seek out the folks that in my organization who are the most open and innovative and upskilled in technology, and the folks who are the best with interpersonal relationships, change management, those sorts of things. And then neither of those individuals I'm speaking of have to necessarily have those titles in their job, or it doesn't have to be explicit. You still have those folks in your organization, whether their day-to-day role states those things or not. I would start there. I would start with the two people who are the most open to adopting these things or already have the most knowledge in a positive light. I would connect them, right? And I would say, okay, let's bridge the human element and the technology element with the knowledge of our organization as much as possible. Then I would bring in the naysayers on both sides of those things as well and start to understand each other's points of view, and then maybe decide on, okay, what's either a use case, a workflow, a team that we can start building this around and exploring how we do that, and take the best practices from those efforts, right? What worked well, what didn't work, what did you glean, and make that into a true flywheel type of activity. You can't just have a town hall and tell everybody this stuff is good. You don't need to be afraid of it, and then expect that somehow things are going to change. That's not a terrible starting point, but it's merely putting one foot in front of the other. You've moved about 3 feet, depending on how long your legs are, right? In that analogy. But I would absolutely start with that. If you continue to create echo chambers, whether it be from a tech aspect or a personality aspect, you're probably not going to overcome some of these barriers as quick as you would like. But when you have a holistic understanding of what your workforce thinks, feels, knows, and can start to move everyone forward collectively from a shared understanding, I mean, there's nothing bad that can come from that.
Yeah. You need naysayers. You need naysayers in the room, right? Because they'll keep you honest. They'll probably think about things you're not thinking about. So
yeah.
That's a good point.
You need it's the design thinking methodology. You need different viewpoints. You need to bring everybody from that perspective. Basically, what Robert was saying is you need to align leadership vision with frontline reality, and Carrie kind of touched this as well. And then you need to utilize and nurture those internal AI advocates, the people who care about the overall success of not only the project but the company, and that they just care about their jobs. And we all know those people in the organizations that they just care just a little bit more than everybody else, and that's kind of what sets themselves apart. And you need them to be the champions of this. But aligning leadership vision with frontline reality is super important. Again, lots of corporate vice presidents, they go talk to some guy on the golf course, or they see someone at a conference, and then they come back and say, we're going to do this, without actually talking to anybody on the front line. And that's one reason I got out of corporate IT. Don't be that guy. Don't be that person. Be the person that comes in and says, I heard about this. How could we use this to transform our business? And you bring in a group of people to kind of figure that out. So I think we're going to get down to like some, critical factors for success. Karen, Rob, we're going to ask you a question. Like, how can leaders address the fears regarding AI?
Yeah, I mean, I will argue we did touch on it a little bit, but again, it's just the transparency, open communication, not having these town halls of, hey, here's what we're doing and here's how great it's going to be. It's a build up. Make a message saying, hey, we want to implement this. How can we do it? Start reaching out to all of the business units and talk to the people, like Brad was saying, the people that everybody know, every org and every business unit. There's always like one or two people, they just do things differently. They have a different mindset. They think outside of the box, because AI right now, as it stands, for successful AI implementations, you do have to kind of think outside of the box right now. There isn't always a clear dollar, hey, this is generating us X more dollars this month. No, it may be saving you money. And so you have to kind of think differently. And so you need to have all those people, and all of those people need to be communicated to. And I think that's, if I had to guess, that's probably why there's a big gap between where leadership is and the employees, is the employees just have no idea what's going on. This has been my experience in multiple, organizations, and only the few know. Only 5 or 6 people actually know what the actual goal is, right? And so communication, huge, making sure people are up to date on what the company's goals are. I mean, you'd be surprised. I've worked in some as somebody providing services, but also as an employee, where you just kind of like, hey, what's our main objective right now? Obviously, we want to generate more revenue, but what else outside of that? And so I think small businesses, the medium-sized businesses, sometimes they'll have some struggles there communicating that to their end users. So that would be my advice to any leader based off what I've seen and heard.
Yeah, I'd also add, don't assume you understand as a leader the entire scope of the fears of your workforce, right? Really, it's better not to assume much of anything, but that's certainly not an area. Because again, fear is typically coming from lack of knowledge or irrationality. Let's just call it what it is. So if you actually allow people to share and state their fears, create an environment where they're not going to be judged or feel like, there's going to be a negative impact because maybe I don't want to seem like I know too little, or I don't want to seem negative, or I don't just be a person who creates an environment where folks can bring their honesty and their fears, however irrational, whatever, and then address them with facts, right? And if you don't have an obvious, well, here's why you don't need to be afraid of that, then figure out together with your folks on your AI committee or tech committee or whatever, that how can we work towards creating a system or a workflow or ensuring that we're addressing what your fear is. And maybe you can't do that 100%, but I'd argue that any effort, any meaningful, genuine, concerted effort in that direction is going to go a long way. And then I would say start small, think big, right? That's what we're talking about. Give people a one use case that they can wrap their hands around and start using and get a little bit comfortable with. Don't try to cram it all down their throat at one time.
I'd be making my own committee of all the people that I know and just meeting with them at least once or twice, at least once a month, or maybe one or every other month. So that's what I would look for, because you need to just have these conversations. That's one reason why we started this podcast too, because we do have these conversations all the time. It's like, hey, people might be interested in hearing about this. This is what we're thinking about. Even having discussions like this is what you could discuss in a committee, right? How is this going to impact us culturally in our business? Those are the things, you have to have communication. And it's so ironic because you think that's just the obvious, but so many times, and I'm guilty of this, you get trapped in doing your job. You're working 40 to 60 hours a week trying to solve this one problem. And sometimes you need to take a step back and take some hours out of your week and focus on these things, or even just a month. An hour meeting a month is not too much to ask of 8 to 9 people in an organization typically to talk about this, especially how huge it is, right? And it obviously, leaders care about this stuff. The metrics and reports, every report matches what Microsoft is saying. Leaders want to implement this. I think it was 79% of leaders want to implement AI. So, and I think it was specifically AI agents. So they want to do this. So to me, that's how you get over that hump.
Yeah. And something else, I think once you get past addressing explicit fears, right? Let people bring those, address them explicitly. But beyond that, leaders probably start to feel more relaxed, reassured, excited, happy when you start talking about ROI, right? They're like, oh, this is going to get us ROI. Whew, that sounds amazing. How do we do that? Let's be honest, not every single person in your organization is going to be motivated to that level by an ROI conversation alone. Sure, no one thinks that's a bad thing, but where possible, when you move past the explicit fears, if it were me, I would try to tie the impacts and the goals to your company values, right? Is one of your values that you want the 80-20 rule so that people can have work-life balance, or they can have time to upskill, or they can do whatever? Well, leveraging some of these tools allows for that 20% to happen, right? Or is one of your values that you're very philanthropic and you encourage your entire workforce to take a day or two a year to go and volunteer? Well, maybe now that can be 4 days a year because of the time savings. So I think that there are ways to to tie this to larger things than just ROI, which is obviously, the most important for most folks, but it's not it's not mutually exclusive that it has to be that or something else, right?
Yeah, and I think business leaders again get caught up in that ROI conversation, and this when it's something to do with the culture and it has something to do with the overall operations of your organization as a whole. It's hard to put an ROI on a lot of these numbers. We can, you tell us if you want to see an ROI of a specific workflow, or what we automated this workflow, what things we increase. We can work with you to get you a number. But to me, if you're thinking about that's the first thing you're thinking about. Personally, like I think you're probably thinking it from the wrong concepts, because as Microsoft has shown with all these stats that go beyond anything I could ever tell you, they're showing that this is coming whether you want it or not. So that, to me, what you need to do is like, how can I streamline the operations within my business utilizing the tools that are being put in front of me? And Robert had a perfect example. You start a committee. I call them center of excellence. So start an AI center of excellence or a data center of excellence. And so you have people from different parts of your organization coming together and like, how can we prepare for and solve this large problem that's coming? Like AI is coming. The last week's episode, we were talking about the power issue and AI and the race versus China and the United States and the Western cultures. Like that's a conversation that has to happen there. Just like this is a conversation that has to happen within your organization. It's coming whether you want it or not. So you can be pulled along, kicking and streaming, or you can be at the forefront and just lead by example. And it's kind of up to you where you want to be with that organization. The organizations that don't get on this train within the next 12 to 18 months are going to get left behind. That's just the truth. You can't really sugarcoat anymore. And it doesn't take that much to start a center of excellence to say, hey, let's take one person from HR, let's take one person from accounting, let's take one person from operations, and let's bring them together and say, what are our goals over the next 12 to 18 months to streamline these operations utilizing these tools? And you just start from there.
And it doesn't mean you have to spend $1. That's, you just talking about it brings so much value.
And that's one of the things we do with our customers is how we call stakeholder meetings. We just talk to them for the first couple of days on site, are generally just talking and like understanding where they're coming from. And when we're done, we provide them with a report based upon our outside knowledge plus their internal knowledge and their internal workforce. And we tell all the times like, I had no idea that we were doing this or we were doing that, because it's all institutional knowledge living in someone's head. We need to not stop that. We need to. The beauty of AI is it takes your data from all your disparate systems and everywhere and brings it all together. You have to start that before you even do it with AI internally. You need to break down those walls and those barriers between your organization and all come together before you even think about AI. Until you change that culture shift team to team, then utilizing AI is really not going to change anything. Then you just have a dictatorship at the top, and it's, again, the CCP versus USA. So it's kind of up to you what side you want to be on. I'd much rather be on the free thinking side personally. So Carrie, do you want to talk about the risks of neglecting this cultural readiness we talked about? Kind of touch on some of the ways that, again, don't want to fear monger, but just let folks know that the things that could come along if you don't change that culture.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, one of the most obvious is that the folks in your organization today who would be great for that center of excellence, those are going to be probably the quickest to leave your organization, because if you're not empowering them to move into the way of the future and give them the tools they need to upskill, to grow, to provide value. Sure, we go to work for a paycheck, but I think most of us want to be tied to something larger than just that. And those are your biggest assets, right? They're not only from their individual contributions, but the butterfly effect of having those folks in your company and interacting and influencing both current and future workforce, right? So I think it's a huge one. And when we're talking about the people aspect, I think also at some point the boomers of the world are going to retire. What knowledge did they take with them? How are you going to be able to replace them with a generation that's more accustomed to utilizing technology? And even the least technologically savvy young folks today are often more expect more and are more familiar with technology than the boomers that you currently have. And nothing, look, we love them. We love the boomers, right? But let's be honest, at some point they're going to retire, and you have to just accept that fact. And what is going to be the impact of that? So if you went from having these great folks, so let's say that you don't adopt, you've lost the people who would be most willing to adopt, or the most innovative, and those folks, and you've lost the boomers, and you can't either attract or retain good talent, tech savvy talent to replace them. What does your organization look like? Probably vastly different, maybe a shadow of itself. what's your likelihood of long going business continuity or competitiveness at that point? I mean, that's not fear mongering. That's like baseline, probably the sugar coated reality of what can happen. Beyond that, your competitors are looking at these things, or they will, but maybe before you do, right? And what people don't understand, one of the biggest misconceptions is that AI is some all or nothing light switch that finally you're just crunch time is going to come and you're going to pay somebody to flip it on. It does not work that way. It's not possible. It's the same as saying, okay, skip all this. Like, let's get the drawings and the foundation and the plumbing. Like, I want a house tomorrow and I want the whole thing, just poof, house. It's not, you can't do that. And this is how that works. And you don't have to, sure, AI is great, but the journey to that, there's a lot of good that can come from just process optimization, just automation, right? On the way to that. But like Brad said, whether you like it or not, it's kind of like when the Model T came out. Okay. Let's say that you're an organization back in the day that delivered goods. It doesn't matter how much you like horses or how much you were afraid to get into a car, an automobile that was brand new. If your competitors are now delivering their goods 20 times as far, 20 times as fast, and it's probably once you pay for, like, let's say once you pay off an automobile, now you just have to pay for maintenance versus the horse is going to continue to have a cost all the time, right? Like, some of our processes and our tools inside of an organization are that way. Are you paying death by 1,000 SaaS products right now per month per user that you really are not getting the ROI you need, and you're going to continue to have that spin while other folks are building stuff that's better output and not going to have an ongoing associated cost for that specific workflow to be solved? There's just so many factors. It's almost hard to pick where to unpack them, but this is a cataclysmic shift. And so to think that you're somehow going to skirt that in the long term is completely naive.
Yeah, I can't remember if I brought this up on another episode, and so if I did, I apologize, but it just relates so well that if you go look at the Fortune 500 companies pre-internet, pre-dot-com boom, and compare them to the companies today, it's pretty wild. I mean, big companies like HP, and I can't think of any of the others off the top of my head because I don't have the list in front of me, but like HP, right? They were huge. And Brad, we looked this up. I'm trying to think. I should probably have looked this up before talking about it, but you see all these companies that were industry leaders. They're the biggest companies in the world. And I know, look, this is very dramatic, right? Like, hey, I own a mom and pop construction company. This doesn't apply to me. It does, just at a different scale. Okay. It does. It's just different scale. If those behemoths, if that can happen to them, it could happen to anybody. They didn't see the future. They didn't pivot. They didn't do something right. And so I think that's kind of the ultimate picture here, is if you don't try to adjust this, if you don't try to get the cultural impact and get people bought in, your employees, whether it is your employees or whether it is your leadership, that's what's at risk here. You're at risk of losing to another company that is making those next steps. And again, guys, we're not saying every company needs to go out there and implement AI right now. What we're advising and saying, and what we tell our customers and potential customers all the time, is like, you need to be talking about this. You need to be thinking about the cultural impact. And what happens if I just push out a solution? Everybody knows about ERPs. I think everybody hates every ERP because it's just shoved down everybody's throats. And here's a new ERP solution, typically with no communication, typically with no hand holding, or, hey, here's why we're doing it this way, or here's why we're doing it that way. And now there's just perception of like, oh, every ERP is horrible, And so the same thing could happen with AI. The same thing is happening with AI today. You have one side of people that are, I would say we're kind of like this. We're all in AI. We see the value. We know the pros and cons, and we're honest about it. And then you have this other group of people where it's like, we're not doing this. It's not as good as everybody says it is. And so it's like, you have to mesh all those personalities kind of in the middle and see what makes sense for your business. Because what makes sense for your business might not make sense for another business, given the culture, given the processes, and all of those things. And so I don't know. I'm sure there's some comparison chart out there, Brad, we could throw up, but we'll look for one. But it's fat. Like, go look up Fortune 500 companies pre.com and compare it today, and you'll see these huge names that back in the day you would remember. It's like, oh my gosh, I completely forgot about them, and they're not even anywhere near where they were. So this is even, and I would argue this is even bigger. I was really young during the dot-com boom, so there's a lot of people, probably saying this guy doesn't know what he's talking about, and maybe I probably don't. I don't know. I think this is much bigger than the dot-com boom, potentially. Like, this is going to be, hundreds of years, people are going to look back at this moment. I think it's going to be a big shift. So
yeah, don't you don't have to listen to me. Go back to the last, or Robert, about that. Go back to the last episode and listen to Dr. Eric Schmidt, who was testifying before Congress and saying this is the single most important time in human history, basically, because of the amount of rapid change that's going to happen and the way we're going to exponentially increase, right? There's Moore's Law, which was about like the chipsets would improve every so often because, it was in it for 20 years or for 50 years that was accurate. And now it's not anymore because we're using AI to help develop things in a much, much faster thing. Robert talks about HP, Eastman Kodak. Remember them? Where are they? What they around? All these companies, if you just go look up, I'm looking at a list right now of the Fortune 500 companies or Fortune 100 companies in 1990, and you wouldn't recognize 70% of these names. The oil and gas companies are still there, and then the ones like Procter and Gamble, of course. But even like Ford and General Motors, General Motors was the number one company in 1990. They're nowhere even near the top now. It's all technology companies. Why? Because they're utilizing AI and they're utilizing technology to automate their processes and spread their wealth. All the trillion-dollar companies in the world are technology-based companies. Why? Because they're utilizing technology to help them scale. As Carrie said earlier, technology is a great equalizer. And this is more important to medium and small businesses because the large-scale, enterprises, they're slow-moving ships. There's, the destroyer versus the aircraft carrier. Like, it's the same sort of thing. The aircraft carrier is going to take a lot longer to turn. So like you can be more nimble and you can use these tools to punch above your pay grade. So Carrie talked about how, getting cultural readiness and like, how can you even think about how to get this conversation started within your organization? Use a survey. You're Microsoft 365, you have Microsoft Forms. If you're not Microsoft 365, use a Google form or SurveyMonkey. Send out a survey to all of your employees and just ask them, what are your current feelings of AI? Do you use AI every day? Use ChatGPT or Microsoft Copilot and say, send an AI readiness survey to my employees. What should I ask them? And it'll give you what you need to ask them. And then you'll at least have some insights and let them have those conversations. And you can have a checkbox. Would you like to take part in further discussions? Checkbox, yes. And then those are the people that you talk to about being part of the Center of Excellence. Again, leaders, I think, are being reactionary instead of proactive. And again, don't take my word for it. Take Microsoft's word for it with this report they did with 31,000 respondents, and take Dr. Eric Schmidt's, words from the last congressional hearing before Congress talking about this. It's coming. And so you can just be proactive and talk to folks and get them involved. And you're going to have, like Carrie was saying, you're going to have the more passionate users within your organization who are ready to step up and take it because excites them. I talk to people all the time. They're not technologists who are excited about AI. I was sitting next to a law student yesterday who is extremely excited about it and is actually writing a paper about it just because he's very interested in it. And so it's something that, again, just be a leader and go out there. You need to be collaborative, I think, for this to be successful. All right. So I think we'll kind of start wrapping things up and we'll start with a little hot take segment. Carrie, do you want to go from there?
Yeah, we've talked a lot in this episode about it's not just on leaders, but leaders have to go first, right? You set the tone, you make it okay to either try new things, to be innovative, to express your fears, whatever it may be. You're the leader. And so, go first and allow your workforce to benefit from open dialogue and from new tools that can help both them and their workflows and the organization as a whole.
Yeah, and I'll do mine, Brad. I think the big thing is AI right now, to see true success, it's on your organization, your people, to come up with these ideas and see where it makes sense. There's not a tool out there that I'm aware of right now that is changing ChatGPT is, right? But I'm speaking strictly SaaS out there. That's just solving all these problems without you also having to do 20 or 30 different things to get it to work the way you want it to work. So what does that mean? That means it's up to you and your organization, either maybe not to develop these solutions, but to talk about them and see what makes sense, what's worth the investment and what isn't. So that's my hot take right now.
Yeah, and I'll start with the culture eats AI strategy for breakfast. And that just means that your culture is far more important than any strategy you come up with. If you have a toxic culture, regardless of what strategy you come up with, that's not going to be successful. So you have to create a culture and foster a culture of growth and people wanting to learn more and people wanting to upskill. But you also, as leaders, need to enable all of that to happen. You can't just say, hey, go upskill and then just like send them a YouTube list. Upskill and like, let's talk about what that looks like. And maybe that looks different from department to department, or maybe you have a baseline one, like go learn the basics of Microsoft Copilot. And that's something you can just send out to the whole organization. So don't just like, hey, you need to go do this and just expect people to do those other stuff. It needs to be conversational. It's all about creating that culture of openness. And again, there's no bad ideas. There are just some ideas that are catered for success more than others, is the way you kind of look at it. And I think as long as you have those conversations and you're open and honest and you lead by example. I think 2 episodes ago, I mentioned Simon Sinek's Leaders Eat Last. I think that's, and then like the infinite game where you're thinking long-term more than just quarters. I think that's the way you should probably try to drive your business and adopt AI. AI is just another tool in the tool belt. We say that all the time. And with that said, Carrie, do you want to lead us with the call to action?
Yeah, so we love hearing from, our listeners, watchers, depending on your platform, and tell us, what are you enjoying? What do you want to hear more of? Do you have a win or a use case or a quip that you'd like us to feature on the show? We'd love to explore that. What do you think about the resources that we share in the links? Any of those things, we really want this to be as useful and engaging for folks as possible. So your feedback is invaluable, and you can check out our podcast on pretty much any of your favorite platforms via the links in the show notes.
And if you just want to know where the heck we're at, you can go to linktree.com/digitalmeld. It has all of our links to both the podcast and to Digital Meld itself, including all of our social media. And I think we'll just leave it with this, but AI is not going to replace people. It's going to elevate them, right? But the success of that depends not only on the leaderships within your organization, but the overall culture and the people within your organization. So you have to kind of lead by example, and that includes within your department, it includes within your teams, it includes within your company. Lead by example, lead from the front, and just be open and honest with all the ways that it can help improve your life. And then also don't be afraid to share where you think that sometimes it's not worthwhile. Because again, you have your business knowledge that only you know, and you should be screaming that from the rooftop so others around you understand that. And I think through that, you'll have the best success. Again, culture shift doesn't change overnight. Microsoft released this report because they know that. I think they're going to do this annually for the next several years, and hoping that changes. But the change is coming, and so we have to just try to keep pace. And so we thank you again for joining us. We appreciate your time. We look forward to talking to you next week. Bye.
See ya.
We want to hear about your AI and automation journey, and we'd love for you to get involved with Start Small, Think Big. If you'd like to participate or offer feedback, please reach out to us anytime via email at contact@digitalmeld.io or use the contact form on our website, digitalmeld.io/contact. Also, please help spread the word by liking, subscribing, and sharing our podcasts on your podcast platform of choice. Thanks.